Welcome back, everybody. It's so great to see you all today, and I'm so glad that you're here. It's Thursday, October 23rd, and we're continuing our deep dive into Bemidbar, especially this amazing chapter of Numbers, chapter 22, and the saga of Bilam and Balak. Bilam is that foreign prophet who is hired by King Balak of Moab to place a curse on the Israelites as they're making their way through the wilderness. We introduced this fabulous story. Three chapters that are chapter 22, 23, and 24 of Numbers that are called by the Talmud a book unto themselves. Um, and last week we met the characters, we set the scene, we learned about the conflict that it immediately sets up because Bilam seems to be this renowned figure in the ancient world who has this power. It says of him, I know that whoever you bless will be blessed, and whoever you curse will be cursed. You have this power in your lips with you. That's awesome. However, um, when it comes to being hired to curse the people of Israel, we already heard those words way back in the time of Abraham. Whoever blesses you will be blessed, whoever curses you will be cursed. So this conflict is set up right at the beginning of the story. Who's going to win out? The people of Israel or Bilam the foreign prophet? Spoiler alert, we know that how this story is going to evolve. The story is going to happen that every time Bilam opens his mouth to say words of cursing Israel, what's going to come forth are words of blessing instead. But we're not quite there yet. In fact, we're still sort of in the prelude of the story because ultimately we're going to get to the most famous part of this story is the talking donkey that Balaam rides on his way there. That's going to be our topic for next week. Today, we're still seeing the events of the commissioning of Balaam to do this deed. So I'm in Numbers chapter 22, and last week we read the first couple of verses through verse 7, through verse 6. 7 is where I want us to pick it up today. So I'll put it up on the screen, and we're going to see what happens in this story, that Balak's team comes to meet with Bilam to hire him to do this deed. And at first, he's going to refuse. And only on the second time that they come and visit is he going to agree to go on this mission. Let's see how this story unfolds. Numbers 22, beginning with verse 7. And do I have a volunteer who'd like to read the text for us today? I see Paula. Hi, Paula. Okay, it's coming up on the screen, I think. Um,
Okay.
nope, that's the wrong one. That's the source sheet that we'll look at in a few minutes. Um, there it is.
Okay. Starting
Okay,
with
take it away.
the elders or whom?
That's right.
Starting with what?
Oh,
The elders?
yeah.
Okay. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, versed in divination, set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, spend the night here, and I shall reply to you as Adonai may instruct me. So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and said, what do these people want of you? Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is a people that came out from Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off. But God said to Balaam, do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed. Balaam arose in the morning and said to Balak's dignitaries, go back to your own country, for Adonai will not let me go with you. The Moabite dignitaries left, and they came to Balak and said, Balaam refused to come with us. Then Balak sent other dignitaries, more numerous and distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said to him, thus says Balak, son of Zippor, please do not refuse to come to me. I will reward you richly, and I will do anything you ask of me. Only come and damn this people for me. Balaam replied to Balak's officials, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything, big or little, contrary to the command of Adonai my God. So you too stay here overnight and let me find out what else Adonai may say to me. That night God came to Balaam and said to him, if these men have come to invite you, you may go with them. But whatever I command you, that you shall do.
Great. Thank you, Paula. We're going to go back to the top where she started, back to verse 7. Um, and I want to look at it verse by verse, but I say at least two big questions that I think we want to talk about. One is, how is it that this foreign prophet, this guy Bilam, who, as we will see, there's multiple different ways of looking at him, a positive way or in a negative way. How is it that he has a direct line to Adonai, the God of Israel? That's one question that we want to explore. The second question we want to explore, I think, is why do we have these two visits? Why does God condemn, refuse to allow Bilam to go on this mission the first time, but when they come and ask the second time, God gives him permission to go? And maybe you have other questions or other interesting things will come up in the course of our conversation here. But I see those as the two big questions about this passage. And Jewish commentaries and Midrash have had a lot to say about both of those things throughout the years. So let's go back to the top, to verse 7. V'yelchu ziknei Moab v'ziknei Midian ukasamim biyadam. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, who were, our translation says, versed in divination. We're going to talk about that enigmatic phrase in a minute. They set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. Two things that come to mind about this verse. We mentioned this a little bit last time. The elders of Moab, that makes sense because Balak is the king of Moab. They're the arch enemies of this story. What are the Midianites doing here? Well, they're like a neighboring kingdom. We talked about this a little bit last time, I think, that a neighboring kingdom, you can imagine Balak saying, hey, this is a regional threat, not just a threat against the kingdom of Moab. So you can imagine him bringing in the neighbors to, um, uh, as they're condemning the people of Israel making their way through. But maybe there's something more subtle about Midian also. You remember Midian is also important in the Passover story because if you recall the beginning of the Passover story, when Moses strikes the Egyptian taskmaster and then has to flee Egypt for his life, he spends the first chapter of his life, of his adult life, in the land of Midian. He marries a Midianite wife, Zipporah. His father is a priest of Midian, that's Jethro, and so on. So there's a midrash at least that says, what's Midian doing here? Well, Moab reached out to Midian and said, hey, you know this guy, this king of Israel, this guy Moses. Give us some insight about how we can attack him and how we can dominate him. So that's one interesting insight about what Midianites are doing here. We will also see that they quickly disappear from the story without any fanfare, that by a few sentences down, they're never heard from again, and we might wonder what became of them. The enigmatic phrase, Samim biyadam, is also worthy of our attention in this verse as well. Our translation says, the elders of these two countries, Moab and Midian, who were versed in divination. The Hebrew is kisamim biyadam. So the second word is easy, in their hands, biyad, right? In their hands. What was in their hands? Kisamim. Kesem is magic. So it's an obscure phrase to translate. It sounds like their magics, in the plural, were in their hand. You can see why JPS tried to translate this as they were well versed in divination. That's a good guess about what this strange phrase might mean, but maybe we have another explanation. Robert Alter, in his translation, has their spells. He also recognizes that it's a bit obscure, but he says their spells were in their hand. In other words, they showed up on the doorstep of this famous, world famous magician, Bilam, and they said, "Look, we've got those skills as well. Just so you know, you're world famous, but we're at least acolytes of magic, soothsaying, blessing, and cursing as well." What does this add to the story, though? In other words, why is it necessary to say they showed up with their credentials in evidence of also being magicians? What does that add to the understanding of this of the story and this verse? Rebecca,
All right, what I was thinking about wasn't that question, although it's also a very question, but
thank you.
I was thinking about, sorry, I was thinking about that there's this long biblical tradition of God asking questions that he already knows the answer to. Um, when God says to Balaam, what do these people want of you? I mean, presumably God already knows. But there seems to be this long tradition of God asking a question in order to give the human a chance to speak. Like, where is Abel, your brother? Or saying to Adam and Eve, where are you? Or probably a lot of others that I can't remember right now, but it seems to be something that happens pretty often.
Yeah.
I just thought that was interesting.
So you want to talk about that instead of my question?
No, it's just I had my hand raised before you asked that question, so it's something that I was thinking of from.
That's fair enough. I was thinking the same thing about that interesting verse when God comes to Bilam and says, "What do these people want of you?" Um, two possible responses that I can think of. First of all, God does this a lot in the Torah, asks questions that, like you said, Rebecca, God already knows the answer to. The most famous one you mentioned also, when God says to Adam in the Garden of Eden, after eating the fruit of the tree, the first question God says is, Ayeka, where are you? Well, God knows where Adam is. Um, it's on one hand a rhetorical question, a way of opening up a conversation. That's the kind of straightforward, banal kind of answer. Um, um, and that famous verse, there's a lot of commentary in the Garden of Eden that the question that God asks Adam, "Where are you?" There's a famous Hasidic commentary on that. It says, "Oh, that's the question that God asks each and every one of us every moment of every day. Ayeka, where are you? In your life, in your world, in your relationship with others." I don't know what to do with God saying to Balaam, "What do these people want of you?" Except it opens up the dialogue. I don't know more than that, but thank you for that good question. Go back to my question, which was I forgot what does it mean that they have their magic in their hands and in evidence in front of Balaam, and what does it add to the story? Susan,
I think last week you said Moses is not in these chapters,
right?
and
That's what's
and
one of the things that's so provocative about these stories is, yeah, that they're all Moses and all the Israelites are off camera. So go ahead.
although this does, I mean, I when you asked the question, I thought, oh wait, that sounds like Moses in Pharaoh's court, where he's got these tricks and the magicians are like, well, we can do that too, with the snake and some of them are kind of well, they're all like one for one, but I think okay, some of them are good tricks, and the others are like, why would you add more pests to the air?
Right.
Um, so I went back to that, whether or not we're supposed to. I don't know.
So what's it contributing to the story here? So
Well, as Chekhov said, if you introduce a gun, if there's a gun in the mantelpiece in the first act, it's got to go off in the third. Um, it's, and this would sort of reference back to, oh, look what happens when there are magicians who say, I can do this, and I
I
can
see.
physically do
It
this.
always spells doom for them because they're going to be the object of satire. They were the object of satire back in Exodus, and it's a clue to the reader they will be again here as well. Is that what you're saying? So thank you. That's nice. Judy, not just satire, but the object of derision and mockery also, right? Okay.
Right.
Judy.
Thank you. I was just thinking simply about the contest between, or contest, or yeah, we'll say contest between God and human magic, in quotes. It seems like that does come up in other places, and I think for me it's somewhat tied to this the other question that you're going to discuss about um, Bilam's relationship to God. I mean, he's so I think there's just a contrast between this idea of magic and then God's power. That's how it struck me.
You're a good student of Torah, both of you, because like when you hear magic, it's supposed to imply something to scoff at in the Torah's terms. Um, that's good. I like that. I'll throw a couple of insights from our tradition about what this might mean, although everybody kind of acknowledges that this phrase is a little bit obscure, what it means to say their magic was in their hand. Um, One explanation suggests that maybe this is a way of establishing their credentials with Bilam. Why would Bilam, who lives hundreds of miles away, make this schlep across the wilderness to come do this mission for the king of Moab? Well, they're establishing that we speak this language that you speak also, Bilam. It establishes their credentials with him. Um, a second interpretation is this might mean kind of reinterprets the phrase. Ksamim biadam might mean they have the payment in their hands to pay for his magic. That's not exactly what the Hebrew says, but that's one way of understanding this phrase. And that's interesting because the whole idea of money and wealth is going to come into play in a couple of verses. Um, and then there's a midrash. A midrash about this, which I didn't put on a source sheet for us, but is interesting because it answers another question that I already asked. That the look at how the Hebrew is phrased. The spells in their hand refers specifically to the elders of Midian, not the elders of Moab, but to the elders of Midian. They came and showed Bilam that they're skilled in magic as well. The Midrash says, so you can see that we're authentic and you should come with us right now. And there's no reason to delay. But Bilam does delay. He says, well, let me think about it overnight. I have to check with God and so on. When he delays, they say, this guy is a big fake, and they leave. It's an elaborate roundabout midrash that explains how come the Midianites are here and then they disappear from the story. So he says they showed up with their magic credentials. Bilam said, well, I have to wait. I delayed. And they said, oh, there's nothing to this. And they leave and only the Moabites stay. That's not the most profound midrash in the world, but it does address that question of what's Midian doing here and what happens to them in the rest of the story when they disappear. Okay, that's enough. There's deeper stuff for us to explore here. He says to them in verse 8, spend the night here, and I will reply to you as Adonai may instruct me. So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. And this is the first really big question that I want to ask us. Because the thing that's amazing about this story is, well, we have to be sensitive to the names of God as they're used in the Torah. God, as you know, has multiple names in the Torah, but the two most common are Elohim and Yud He Vav He, which we pronounce as Adonai. The convention of the JPS translation is when you see the word God in the translation, it's translating the Hebrew word Elohim. And when you see capital letters like Yud He Vav He or the Lord, capital Lord, That's the way JPS translates Adonai from the Hebrew. But again, those two names don't mean exactly the same thing because Elohim is also the generic word for gods. If you talked about the gods of Egypt, the words you use are Elohim. The gods of Babylonia, the words you use are Elohim. And the God of Israel is also sometimes called Elohim, which is interesting. Um, but Adonai is always exclusively the personal name, as it were, for the God of Israel, the God of the Torah. So if you hear it, what's so interesting about this passage and this story is that Bilam, this foreign prophet from far away, has a personal relationship, this personal line to not to Elohim, but to Adonai, the God of Israel. How can that be? Does the God of Israel talk to foreign prophets? Adonai is the God who talks to Moses, who delivers the Torah on Mount Sinai, and so on. The God of Israel. And yet Adonai seems to be the one to whom Bilam has this connection. That causes our commentaries to have that gets them hot and bothered. Do you understand the question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, I just want to check for a second to see if it's yeah. Oh, and even later in this story, in passage that Paula read, a little bit later on, in case you're not convinced, Bilam in verse 18 will refer to Adonai as Adonai, my God.
Yeah.
Adonai Elohai. Adonai, the God of Israel, is my Elohim, is my God. This is very interesting, don't you think? That I think it's pretty exclusive in the entire. There are occasions in the Torah, two other occasions where Adonai speaks to a non-Israelite. But this is the only occasion where you have a non-Israelite who says, Adonai is my Elohim. What's going on in this story? And does that bother anybody or is that enlightening to anybody? I wonder what we do with that. Rachel, do you have a solution to this?
Actually, this is one of the things I've always loved about this story. The
Yeah,
idea that there are, and maybe, Abraham's father was also heading to Canaan, right? And we don't know why. And um, God speaks to Hagar that maybe if we all could just open our ears, God would speak to everybody. And I always loved the idea that God is not just talking to the Israelites, is not just the God of the Israelites or the Jewish God, that God is way more universal than that. And people just need to catch up with it. So I've always loved that about this story.
thank you. John?
Well, I think this is a great story, and I see God here as the director, the choreographer, and he telling this story to make it very powerful has decided to set forth this relationship between himself and Bilam for literary purposes.
That's that's nice because that is kind of the meta theme of this whole story, this whole unit. That unless you've lost perspective, God is in control. We're also going to bring in the question of free will in a minute as well. So the two questions that I asked are actually intertwined with each other. Let's Renata.
Well, I think the first person who talked really answered my question. So Elohim, God, yeah, Adonai is the God of everyone, not just the Jews. Is what she said, and I was trying to think why would Balak send someone to Balaam if he was the God of the Jews? Knowing he was Adonai, he was a legion to the Jews. These are the people he wants to destroy or get rid of. So, but I think she answered that question. She sees Adonai as a God of everyone, which may be the way that Balak saw him. So Balaam also.
Nice, thank you. Thank you. Rebecca.
All right, so I'm not actually sure that I like this answer I've come up with, but I was thinking about it just now, and so you told us last time that Balaam was like this famous prophet in this area's traditions.
Right.
And there's this inscription about him interacting with these pagan gods of whatever pantheon. So so I started thinking about the people who are telling the story and how if it's Israelites or Jews who are telling or retelling it, what do they do when they get up to the part where God or the gods speak to Balaam and inspire him? They might not be okay with the idea that other gods can inspire true prophecy. So, whether it's Israelites or Jews telling it for the first time or retelling a story they'd got from other people, maybe it's the writers who say, no, if there is a God who is truly inspiring prophecy, it can't be these other pagan gods. It has to be Adonai. So that is my best thought of it now.
Your best is pretty good. Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Susan, one more comment on this.
In some of these passages, in some of the passages where God speaks, I think is is God speaking only to one person, or is the person we hear about listening, just a better listener, like, Abraham, Moses, there could have been, God's voice very loud, just shouting out, Lech Lecha, and only Abraham took it seriously. Um,
Mm,
so this could be, oh, oddly enough, Bilam pays attention to God when God's speaking.
I like that too. Um, these are all really good answers to a question that I don't have a concise and clear answer for, except to say, um, who says that Adonai can't have a personal relationship with non-Israelites? You don't make the rules. I make the rules, says God. Um, I think it comes interestingly close to the whole question that we've talked about in our class before, question of chosenness, that kind of that idea, maybe the most misunderstood idea by both Jews and non-Jews about what the Torah teaches. Um, if you still have misconceptions about what Israelite Jewish chosenness is all about, read the prophets, especially the prophet Amos, who essentially says, God says, yeah, I have a special relationship with you. I've chosen you. But you know what? I have special relationships with everybody because I'm the God of the universe. So you think you're so special. I have special relationship with the Egyptians and the Moabites and the Ammonites and everybody else. So don't think that you can get away with stuff that nobody else can get away with. In other words, chosenness means chosen for responsibility. It means chosen for Torah and mitzvot. But I have this relationship with everybody else too, because I'm the God of the universe. Um, in fact, let me go to that for 1 second while we're talking about prophets, because I just shared with you a link to a source sheet, and here's just want to make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Bilam is remembered outside of this story. This story is recalled many times throughout the Torah and throughout the Hebrew Bible. The prophets remember Bilam as well. And it's interesting that sometimes it's negative. The book of Deuteronomy has a very negative view of Bilam. He's this wicked monster who tried to destroy Israel. But there's other places where between the cracks you can hear that they once kind of respected Bilam, or at least recognized that he was God's tool for ultimately blessing Israel. So take a look at the prophet Micah here at the top of the screen here, which is one of the places where there's this memory of Bilam that's not necessarily so terrible. My people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, plotted against you, and how Bilam ben Beor responded to him, recall your passage from Shittim to Gilgal, and you will recognize the gracious acts of Adonai. This thing about how Bilam responded, Balak is the king of Moab. He's always a villain in this story. But Bilam responded to him with reticence and ultimately with words of blessing. Jacob Milgram says this better than I can. Consistently and unflinchingly, Bilam proclaims himself to be Adonai's obedient servant, who, like Moses, denies that he's ever done anything of my own accord. Indeed, when he realizes that God wishes him to bless Israel, he does not proceed until he is suffused with God's Spirit. Finally, Bilam is rewarded for his fidelity to God, not only by God's promise that blessed are they who bless you, but by the book God bestows upon Bilam by granting him a direct revelation without having to resort to divination. In other words, there was a very old favorable view of Bilam, as is evident in Micah. In 8th century Judah, a tradition existed that pinpointed the villain of the story, not Bilam, but Balak. I guess the reason why I put this all on the page for you is to think about, how do we think about Bilam himself? Is he the villain of this story, or is he just sort of an empty vessel who God uses in this story? And by phrasing it that way, you know where I sort of come down on the question. Let's be clear. There are lots of places in the Torah where he is a absolute villain. But there's other places where they seem a little bit more ambivalent about who he was. And I think that's because God chooses to speak through Balaam, which I think is one of the interesting wrinkles of this story. Evelyn, you've been patient, but I wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Uh, I'm just thinking that maybe we can distinguish between religion and peoplehood. If we say that religion is more universal, that there's one God in the world, Balaam is possibly wanting to be part of the Jewish people. And there's kind of a process from being on the outside and coming into the inside of joining the Jewish people.
That's a really interesting statement. In fact, I think I might think about that for the rest of the day today. Is religion a more universal concept than peoplehood? Sometimes. Sometimes religion is what people use to destroy the infidels on the other side of the border also. You know what I mean? I know you know what I mean. What an interesting point. Thank you for that, Evelyn. Okay, we're a little more than halfway through, and we got other important things we've got to discuss here. So let's read a little bit more. But this is going to flow into the second question. The second question, I want to look at the second visit of the dignitaries. Sorry, I've got a lot of windows open on my screen now, so I got to reconfigure these things. Okay, so what happens? What do these people want of you? God says to Bilam in the night. Rebecca already put on the table, what kind of question is this? Let's consider it a rhetorical question, because God wants to hear Bilam say it. So let's say it. Bilam said to God, Bilam says to Elohim. I'm not sure the significance of that. The narrator here uses Elohim instead of Adonai, but Bilam says to Elohim, Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab, sent me this message. Here's a people that came out from Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off. And Elohim makes a clear response. Do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed. Okay, so God's response is unambiguous here. You're not to go. And Bilam listens. He arises in the morning and said to Balak's dignitaries, go back to your own country because Adonai will not let me go with you. Again, I'm not sure the significance of the toggling back and forth between the two names of God, except to say that they're synonymous. But again, it's so unusual for a non-Israelite to refer to Adonai as opposed to Elohim. Okay, we've made that point. So they leave. The Moabite dignitaries leave, and we might say, what happened to the Midianites? But I gave you the Midrash that already answered that question, right? So the Moabites leave, and they go back to King Balak, and they say, Balaam refused to come for us. Then Balak sends other dignitaries, Rabim unichbadim me'ele. These ones who he sends are more numerous and more nichbad from kavod. They have uh, um, more honor, more distinguished, as the translation here says. They're more nichbad than the first group. So he brings out the heavy hitters. And this second group comes to Bilam and says, thus says Balak, son of Tzipor, please don't refuse to come to me. I will reward you richly, and I will do anything you ask of me. Only come and damn this people for me. This is different, right? The first time the mission was kind of phrased in there's this people that is swallowing up the earth like animals. This time, they appeal to his sense uh, of of money, his to his greed. They say, "We'll pay you anything you want, and I, the king of Moab, will do anything you ask of me if you come and do this mission for me." That must be tempting, don't you think? So instead of refusing this time around, Bilam says, what does he say? Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I couldn't do anything big or little contrary to the command of Adonai Elohai, Adonai my God. So you two stay here overnight and let me find out what else Adonai might say to me. So he's like, well, maybe I'll come. I mean, I appreciate that you made this second schlep through the wilderness to come get me, and you're offering me tons and tons of money. Let me check. Stay here overnight. Let me check with God. That night, God comes to Bilam and says to him, if these men have come to invite you, you may go with them, but whatever I command, you shall do. So the second question for the day is, why does, not Bilam, but why does God relent on this second request when Bilam says, hey, can I go with these guys? They're offering me a lot of money. And God says, okay, you can go, but only as my agent. You're only going to do what I tell you to do. Why does God allow the first time it was unequivocal, do not go. The second time is okay, you can go. Why does God relent? John.
He relents so that we can hear this great story.
Okay, it would be a pretty lame story if Bilam said, oh, I can't go, and the Torah would be a little bit shorter, and we wouldn't have a whole Torah reading on this particular week in the summer. Um, Maybe somebody has another answer to this question. Susan.
Sounds like a test to me. Um,
Of whom?
of of Bilam. What's he going to do? Um, God says to go, and what's he going to say? Is he going to curse the people? Is he going to bless the people? In theory, if we were coming to this with fresh eyes, we wouldn't know what's going to happen. Um, so, I mean, it's great tension, and then you have this other story in between as he's riding. I mean, the tension rises. It's a great story arc. Um, Kind of like all when you look at like the tests of Abraham, that Abraham aces, uh, all of them. And what will Bilam do?
We've given kind of a light response to this question, and the whole story invites kind of a sense of humor. I appreciate that. But it's actually a really serious question because you have to get into the mindset of blessing and cursing. The author of this story takes those things very seriously. If I curse you, it means you are doomed to destruction. So let's say instead of blessing and cursing, let's say Bilam was an arms dealer and said, listen, will you give us the weapons that we need to destroy our enemies here? And first he says, no, 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 that's not right. And this time around, he says, well, okay, maybe you're offering me a lot of money. Now it's a little bit, the terms are a little bit more stark.
Well,
Why is Bilam allowed to go this second time to go use his considerable weapons against Israel?
I,
That's the
I
question.
think I think it's, I was serious that
Mhm.
it's a test, and
Mhm.
we'll see how he does.
Okay. Okay. You've got this technology of destruction in your hands. And okay. And Susan says it's a test. Tell me more. Why does God allow him to go on this second time? Jack. Jack, why can't I hear you? You're not muted. On my screen, you're not muted, but we can't hear you. I'm not sure what the problem is. I'll have to come back to you or run over to where Judy is. Something because you're not muted, but we can't hear. I'm gonna go to Evelyn and we'll come back to you. Evelyn.
I'm thinking about God when Abraham came to him and pleaded for the saving of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this
Hmm.
shows you that God, if he's appealed to, can possibly change his mind.
The God, yeah, but not when it comes to the destruction of Jews.
Well, maybe I understand, but there's a knowledge
I'm
that
think
that he's, almost that he's got a potential to
I
change.
I appreciate what you're saying. I'm thinking of a different precedent in the Torah as well. Let's hear from Renata, and then I'll tell you the precedent that I'm thinking of. Renata?
But I think that God knows that Balaam is only going to say what he tells him to say. And he kind of, if he wants, they really want you to go, go and get the money, but I'll tell you what to say. And Balaam doesn't know what he's going to say until he says it, until God tells him what to say. So God already knows exactly what he's doing.
I get that, and that certainly sets up the rest of the plot of the story. But why would God even give imprimatur to do something so wicked and so evil? I'm thinking of, and because spoiler alert, I read the commentaries that I put on the page here that we're about to look at. I'm thinking of Pharaoh in the Exodus story. Something that we've talked about also in the past, because there's a question that people keep returning to that comes up. You recall that throughout throughout the first 12 chapters of Exodus and the story of the 10 plagues, that Pharaoh Moses says, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh hardens his heart and refuses to let the people go. And again, he does this repeatedly, 10 times at least. Let the people go. I harden my heart. I'm not letting the people go. And then halfway through that story, the language changes. And the Torah says, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And any sensitive Torah reader recognizes that there's an ethical problem there. If Pharaoh was being manipulated by God, if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, then where's the justice in punishing Pharaoh? See, if the connection isn't obvious, let me go to the source sheet here, and I think it'll spell out what the connection is. I'm going to jump over Rabbi Kushner. I'm even going to jump over the this lengthy comment from Rabbi Aramal that's where and look at some more concise comments from the Talmud. Um, the Talmud's answer to this question seems to be that a vote in favor of free will. That initially, well, let's see what the Talmud says. Rabba bar Rav Huna, and some say Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Elazar, says, we learn from all throughout the Tanakh, from the Torah, from the prophets, from the writings, that according to the path a person chooses, so shall he be led. From the Torah, God initially said to Bilam, don't go with them, but subsequently God says, okay, you can go with them. Um, put a pin in it for a second if that's not immediately clear. Here's another. I didn't want to go there. Maybe we want to look at Arama, this medieval philosopher who's commenting on this passage of the Torah. On the first occasion, God, in all God's goodness and love, says, don't go with them. You must not curse that people, they are blessed. When Balaam was told, do not go with them, it was an allusion to this passage from Proverbs. Basically, don't hang out with evil people. That is to say, even if it's not for the same purpose, don't go with them at all, since their path is an evil one. Second, God said to Balaam, you must not curse the people. God was warning Balaam about the deed itself and informing them that no weapon formed against you shall succeed. Oh, so God says to Balaam, and you're doomed to fail anyway, so don't waste your time. But when Balaam inquired of God a second time about going with Balak's men, quoting Proverbs, returning like a dog to its vomit, a great proverb in the Torah, God's anger burned and answered him that he should go in spite of everything, and his shame and reproach would be witnessed before the princes in whose eyes he had thought he would be honored. Um, Let me try to paraphrase what these two comments are saying and think about Pharaoh hardening his heart also. The Torah seems to say that the impetus to do good, to do the right thing, is always there. That God wants to encourage people to do good and to make right choices. But if people stubbornly want to go down a path of destruction or hurt or selfishness or whatever, at a certain point, God stops putting up roadblocks. Like Pharaoh hardening his heart. When Pharaoh starts hardening his heart over and over and over again, then inertia takes over. And I think that's an explanation of how a lot of cruelty and evil comes into the world. That when we start, I think the Torah is very behavioralistic in this regard, that we're trained to do acts of kindness and generosity and goodness so that those things become our nature. And because unfortunately, the opposite is also true. If cruelty or apathy or coldness become habit for us, then those things become our nature as well. And that's a little bit clearer in the story of Pharaoh. You have to kind of bend the Bilam story a little bit to make that point. But they say initially, Bilam knew what the right thing to do was, and that is don't go with these evil people. When he says, well, let me ask a second time, can I go with them this time? They're offering me a lot of money. God says, hey, I don't tell you what to do. You can go do it, but know that you're doomed to destruction. If you can peel away some of the story to these things, I think there's an insight here about how a lot of cruelty and hurt does indeed come into the world. Sometimes we're even shocked and surprised to discover that we're the agents for it. Not you, just me, that I'm the agent for it. Jack, are we able to hear you yet?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Good.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jack.
The cleaning people were here yesterday, and I think they messed with my computer because I didn't have video when I started either. But
Go
anyway,
ahead.
what I was going to say is that when Balaam says, no, I won't go with you because unless I talk with God, it's possible that the Balak's men, wouldn't have believed him. And you're just saying that. You're just making that as an excuse. But when he does go and God changes his words and puts allows the donkey to talk, that's a demonstration of God's power that would not have been necessarily accepted by Balak's men without that visible evidence. So that was the comment I was trying to make.
Very nice. Thank you. I'm glad we got it in now. John.
I just think this is a comedy. I think
What do you mean just a comedy? I take exception to that.
some of the best parts of the Torah are funny.
Of course it's
And,
a comedy, but a lot of important truth and lessons come into the world via comedy. What do you mean just?
for this. It's part of the comic plot. So
I'm
God
just
says
giving.
God says don't go, then God says go. I can even see this as a slapstick kind of thing. I think from start to finish, the main theme is one of comedy.
I hear you. I'm just objecting to the word just, not the word comedy. So, I
I
mean,
retract the word just.
of course, it's a comedy, but in our house, we take our comedy very seriously. That sometimes it's a tool for teaching that can't be substituted by anything else. Rebecca,
Okay, I think that the commentary on what you're saying, it's reminding me of two things. And one um is like a child nagging a parent for something. Like, can I do this thing? And the parent's like, no, that's a bad idea. But are you sure I can't do it? Are you sure I can't do it, Dad? Are you sure I can't? Okay, okay, I still don't think it's a good idea, but okay, you can do it. So, like, especially with an older teenager, and like that doesn't seem too funny an analogy. It's like one time when I was a little kid, my mother was making something and she had um, cooking chocolate out that was like completely zero sugar. I was like, "Ooh, it's chocolate. Can I have some?" She's like, "It has no sugar in it. You won't like it." But I was like, "Well, but I still want to try it." So she's like, "Okay," and she gives it to me. I'm like, "Yeah, that's really bitter." And so it's kind of like, okay, well now I know that baking chocolate is bitter.
yeah,
So
are you done? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
that was one point. I had another one, but I'm done with that point.
I agree with you, and that's a good point. And the Torah does do that on occasion, like often. I just want to point out that the stakes here are a little bit higher. I mean, that this is, and a good parent will do that when the stakes are low. They won't do that when the stakes are higher, like when there's really an element of danger or destruction, right? I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
you
can
agree
see
with
that.
that.
I was
Yeah,
just sort of reminded of that by this
yeah,
talk about, God obviously, like God already gave an answer, but Bilam nagged at him. And God was like, okay, if you really want to do it, then you can do it. But, and
yeah.
so I agree that it's definitely much more serious. But the other thing that it was reminding me of is actually from a later part of the Torah, and that is the book of Judges, where um, Deborah summons, what is his name, Barak, and says, "Go fight um, the Canaanites." And he
Yeah,
says, "If you, the prophetess, will go with me, I'll go. But if not, I won't go." And he's
yeah.
like, "Okay, if that's what you want, I'll go with you. But you won't get the glory because God will give the enemy general into the hand of a woman." So
Hmm.
it's again sort of here the prophetess speaking for God, saying, "Okay, you can have what you want, but there's going to be a cost to it."
Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's a connection I wouldn't have thought of. Nice. Thank you. Evelyn.
I'm just thinking this goes kind of with my thing is, I mean, to go to to finally to go to the mountain. I mean, I know it's just, I think it's so important to realize that once he goes there, I think it's been said so many times, but it just makes sense that things completely changed because he was able to go and see that the people were truly peaceful and praying. So when Bilam went, so that's just saying that your inner belief system can completely change when you come in contact with the other.
That's interesting because, and you, knowing you as I do, you're a very generous person in this reading of Bilam, and you're not wrong. In our final minutes here, let me show you one or two quick things, and that is there are two very different views of Bilam in Jewish tradition. Um, in in one passage from the Midrash, they seem to recognize him as a genius. You know, that I mean, the words are very striking. They say, "Never again," the Torah says, "Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses." And the Midrash says, well, yeah, in Israel, no, but one did arise among the other nations, namely Bilam, son of Beor. That's kind of that sort of um, respect for Bilam is sort of what Evelyn is pointing us towards, that there's a rabbinic view here that he was as great as Moses. That's an extraordinary thing to say. There are other opinions that say, what are you talking about? This passage from Talmud, which I don't have time, but you should check it out on your own, that pictures him suffering in a really grotesque way. It has a necromancer raises him from the dead and says, how are things in hell? And he describes his punishment and torment in hell in particularly gross ways. I'll leave you to read it on your own. Um, let's leave with something a little bit more uplifting, and that's Shai Held, my teacher, my friend. And Rabbi Held, in his commentary, brings together a couple of these disparate points that I've been trying to make today. We talked about how is it that this foreign prophet can have this line to God and to God, to the God of Israel, to Adonai. And we've been talking about these different views of Bilam and what does it mean that a person can go and that first God says don't go and then God gives him permission to go because human beings have agency of their own. We're not automatons. Well, I think Shai brings a couple of these ideas together. Let's see if he does. The bottom line for any teacher or interpreter is that you cannot exegete for God and line your pockets at the same time. We didn't talk much about there is a strand of the commentaries that say Bilam's temptation in the second request is because they promised to make him rich, right? So there's a desire to say, well, maybe I'll set some of my ideals aside for the sake of all this money that I'm going to get. We should add that money is not the only corrupting incentive of a person that a person of faith can encounter. The lure of power or prestige, not to mention fear of opprobrium, can also lead us to sell our souls while convincing ourselves that we are acting with great piety and devotion. There's a lot of truth in that sentence, I think. And we can think of lots of religious figures throughout history who have turned out to sell their souls for the sake of wealth or power or other things. But let's leave on a happier note. What are we to learn from God's utilization of the complex, deeply imperfect figure of Bilam to ultimately bless Israel? Shai is making the point that if you can take the big picture of this story, Bilam becomes a vessel for blessing the people of Israel. The Torah wants us to internalize the reality that God can make use even of people who are deeply flawed to achieve significant and holy ends. This is neither a trite claim nor a truism. On the contrary, it is the reality that makes covenant possible. Since we are all fragile, broken, and sometimes corrupt, God uses only imperfect people to achieve God's ends in the world. And that's some of, I wanted to put that comment here at the end because that resolves some of these things, or at least it's adjacent to some of these questions. How is it that Adonai speaks to Bilam? Because Bilam is God's agent for bringing blessing in the world. How is it that we have such a complicated view of, from one point of view, he's as great as Moses, and another point of view, he's boiling in hell? Yeah, well, he's a complicated, ambivalent figure capable of doing great acts of prophecy and bringing curses into the world in a more dramatic way, like most people that we've interacted with. God only uses imperfect people to achieve God's ends in the world. That's a nice sentence and a nice thought, perhaps, to end on. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Thanks, everybody. It's great being with you. I hope you keep coming back because next week, talking donkeys and the most famous part of this story as Bilam makes his way to his encounter with King Balak. So lots of good stuff for next time. Keep coming back.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
Neil.
great week.
You too.
Bye.